Ancient Egypt had a chronic inflation problem. In this video, we are going to explain how inflation works in a barter economy that is 2,000 years old. On this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Okay, inflation is not well understood at the best of times. As a systemic phenomenon in ancient Egypt, it is easy to overlook its effects on an economy that has been in continuous operation over such a long period of time. In this video, we will explain in the simplest possible terms how inflation works in a barter economy, and how inflation manifested in ancient Egypt. Let's start with how inflation works in a currency-based economy. And the reason we're going to start here is because it's easiest to understand inflation in terms of a currency-based economy. And once you understand that, it can help you to understand how inflation works in a barter-based economy. So what we're going to do here is we're going to begin with an example, basically a toy microeconomy. Now, in our toy economy here, the entire economy has 5 gemstones and a currency supply of 5 coins. The coins are valued according to the sum value of the total available goods. So in this toy economy, each gemstone is worth 1 coin. Now, let's say the government prints another 5 coins. Because the coins can only have value because of their ability to purchase gemstones, each gemstone is now worth 2 coins, and each coin, as a result, is now worth half as much. This is what is called inflation, when the supply of currency outpaces the supply of goods. When the supply of goods outpaces the supply of currency, the value of the currency increases in a process called deflation. So inflation strictly follows the rules of supply and demand. Now, that's how inflation works in a currency economy. How it works in a barter economy is not that much different. It's just slightly shifts where the value goes. In a barter economy, there is no currency. You basically trade one good for another kind of good, and you basically negotiate the value. Now we're going to have a second barter-based toy economy. But this time, instead of coins and gemstones, we're going to use goats and bags of wheat. And in our economy, we're going to have 5 goats and 5 bags of wheat. Each bag of wheat is worth 1 goat, and 1 goat is worth a bag of wheat. And people can trade a bag of wheat for a goat, or a goat for a bag of wheat. Okay? Now, let's say we have a person who trades his goat for a bag of wheat, and then he eats the bag of wheat. That bag of wheat is consumed and no longer in the economy. Each bag of wheat is now worth 25% more unless that bag of wheat is replaced. So, as the supply of an essential good decreases, or the demand for that good increases, the relative cost of the goods increases. This is how inflation works in a barter economy. It's through the supply and demand of goods. Now, how does this apply to Egypt and its economy? Because ancient Egypt had an economy that lasted for 3,000 years, and because the Egyptians left us a lot of receipts with prices of commodities, we can observe how the economy of Egypt changed over time. And one area where inflation manifests visibly to us today is in the construction of royal tombs. During dynasties 2 and 3, Egyptian kings were building progressively larger tombs. They started with mastabas, then moved to step pyramids, which is a mastaba on a mastaba on a mastaba. And then they started to create multiple experimental pyramids. This happened during the reign of Senefru. But around 2350 BC, the Egyptians hit a wall with the Pyramid of Khufu in the 4th dynasty. The pyramid was built entirely of stone, and it was horrendously expensive. Between the cost of labor that you had to pay with grain, meat, oil, and wine, the cost to harvest the building materials from the stone quarries created a project that drove the nation into a financial crisis. Now, stone pyramids after Khufu continued to be built, but now on a smaller scale. Khafre's pyramid was smaller than Khufu's, and Menkare's pyramid was smaller again. However, even with the reducing the size of the pyramid, Menkare's pyramid would be the last pyramid that was made entirely of stone. In the 5th dynasty and onward, pyramids started to be made with mud brick cores because it was cheaper. By using mud brick instead of building a pyramid entirely of stone, one no longer needed as much expensive skilled craftsmen to quarry the stone and to carve it into place. Slaves could now be used to make mud bricks. Mud bricks didn't need skilled craftsmen to make them or to move them into shape. And then you only needed the skilled craftsmen to do the final paving stones and to decorate the interior of the tomb. Later on, during the civil war of the 10th and 11th dynasties, things got expensive again, as resources had to go towards feeding armies instead of tomb building. And the 11th dynasty Theban kings started to build less expensive Saf tombs. In the 12th dynasty, mud brick pyramid building resumed. However, the price of goods had not declined. So the kings of the Middle Kingdom came up with this idea to shore up the price of goods, which was to campaign into the Levant and Nubia to bring grain, oil, wine, precious metals, and wood into the country. This offset the cost of goods by increasing their supply. During the reign of Ahmose I, who was the first king of Dynasty 18, he built Egypt's last pyramid at Abydos. Now, compared to other pyramids, it was diminutive, only being about 120 feet on each side. The cost of building pyramids was no longer feasible in Egypt. And from Amenhotep I through to the end of Dynasty 20, rock-cut tombs with little pyramid shrines in front of them became the less expensive alternative to pyramids. Now, we have to be cognizant of the fact that during Dynasties 18 and 19, the prices of goods in Egypt were offset by the import of tribute. The policies of extracting tribute from your hegemonic territories that was instituted during the Middle Kingdom were re-established under the reign of Thutmose III. Thutmose III conquered both Nubia and the Levant and set up these little garrison towns to collect tribute. That tribute returned to Egypt, increasing the supply of goods that lowered prices domestically. So this extraction of tribute from their colonial territories continued until the Egyptians started losing their hegemonic control during the reign of Ramses II. Egyptologist Jacques J. Johnson wrote, quote, "In the following section, we shall find indications of an analogous situation. when barley is used as a unit of value. And, as in the case of emmer, I am inclined to see in the barley prices also some proof of inflation at the end of the 19th dynasty, although less obviously than during the reign of Ramses VII and his successor. End quote. Janssen, Commodity Prices from the Ramessid Period, page 122. Now, by the end of the reign of Ramses III, the Egyptians had lost control of their hegemonic holdings, and the prices of grain and metals skyrocketed. This led to a loss of confidence in the king, civil unrest, and was potentially an explanation for why Ramses III was assassinated. Following Dynasty 20, royal burials went cheaper again, with the kings beginning to be buried under the floors of temples instead of in rock-cut tombs. These tombs weren't elaborate, they weren't beautiful, they were just under the temple floor. And this kind of econo-burial continued through dynasties 21 and 22. Now, we should note that inflation in Egypt didn't just apply to grain prices or the building of royal tombs. It happened in other goods too. Another interesting example of the way inflation worked in Egypt was the price of slaves. There are several recorded receipts for slave purchases, from which we can actually draw upon, basically, see what the going rate for a slave was. Now, while the Egyptians used the deben and the kete as units of metal weight, for the sake of consistency, we have converted all the weights to shekels, which is 9.6 to 9.8 grams. From 2200 to 2000 BC, slaves cost around 10 shekels of silver. From 1700 to 1600 BC, the price for a slave was between 15 and 30 shekels of silver. Now, during 1400 to 1200 BC, this is again the height of Egypt's golden age, that's that time between, say, Thutmose III and Ramses II, the price of slaves in Egypt dropped to about 6 shekels. Now, the reason for the price drop appears to be that Egyptian military campaigns into Canaan and Nubia during the late 18th dynasty and 19th dynasty greatly increased the supply of slaves in Egypt. More slaves, lower prices. And then finally, around 1000 BC, the cost of slaves skyrocketed again to 50 to 60 shekels as the supply of new fresh slaves in Egypt waned. So here we see a progressive increase of the cost of a single good, which is a slave, over thousands of years. Inflation in Egypt didn't happen quickly, but it is an observable phenomenon, and it did affect how the Egyptians built, how they controlled the supply of goods, and how their economy worked. So, one of the takeaways from all this is that just reverting back to a barter economy won't necessarily drive down the cost of living. It all boils down to the essential supply and demand formula. More supply, lower the cost. Higher demand, higher the cost. Lower the supply, higher the cost again. This is how inflation works in a barter economy. And really, this is just basic economics 101. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. And people can trade a bag of goat, a bag of goat.
That's either very small goat or one big bag.